Hello, lovely people. Welcome back to the RR Show. I'm your host, Jane, and today's episode is all about those teeny tiny decisions that have wildly disproportionate consequences. The kind where you think, oh, that'll be fine, and then somehow end up accidentally sending a naked photo of yourself into the family group chat. We've got accidental humiliation, neighbourly misunderstandings, social interactions gone spectacularly wrong, and enough awkwardness to keep people awake at night for years. Now, before we get into that, if you've got a story of your own, whether it's awkward, ridiculous, messy, you can send it over to me at jrice@evergreenpodcast.com. I would love to give them a read and maybe include them in a future episode. Now, our first story today comes from user Steeboy, and it's titled, "Today I Fucked Up by Informing My Family I Was Engaged with a Dick Pic." Let's get started. Naturally, this "today I fucked up" didn't actually happen today. It happened about 2 weeks ago. Honestly, the moment it happened, I considered writing this post immediately, but after making the mistake of accidentally sending my Johnson out into the world, I thought maybe I'd give myself a little time to decide whether I really wanted this to live on the internet forever. Unfortunately, my family had already made that decision for me. They've told just about everyone they know, so I figured I might as well bring all of you into the fold. For some context, my girlfriend and I have been together for about 3 years, and I am completely in love with this woman. She's kind beyond words, hilarious, fun to be around, and frankly, I can't imagine a better relationship. A while back, her mother offered me her grandmother's ring to use for the proposal. I considered it an incredible honour. I also considered it one of the most terrifying responsibilities I'd ever been given. For 2 weeks, I carried around a family heirloom worth more in sentimental value than I could possibly put into words. Then I handed it over to a jeweler to have it cleaned and resized, which somehow made me even more anxious. By the time I finally got the ring back, I was desperate to propose. I know that probably isn't the most romantic way to describe it. It wasn't that I wasn't excited. I was just also a nervous wreck carrying around someone else's family history in my pocket. Eventually, I got home, got down on one knee and asked the question. She said yes, it was perfect. One of those moments that you'll remember for the rest of your life. And then I got creative on really burning it into my memory. Now, in my opinion, engagement announcements all tend to look the same. It's either the close-up shot of two hands with the ring front and center, or the couple picture where the woman's hand is across the guy's chest so everyone can admire the rock. It's sweet, but it's also been done to death. So I suggested to my now fiancé that we could do something a little different. And to my surprise, she agreed. We settled on taking a picture of me completely naked in bed, lying on my back with her hand in the foreground covering my dignity with the ring. The photo was hilarious, and so we proudly sent it into the family group chat. And everyone loved it. As it turns out, the photo had been taken using live mode. For those unfamiliar, live photos don't just capture a still image. If you press and hold on them, they play a few seconds before and after the photo was taken. A detail neither of us had thought to check. When the live photo played, my fiancé's hand moved out of the way, completely out of the way, revealing a perfect, unobstructed shot of me, as naked as the day I was born, grinning from ear to ear, doing finger guns. I eventually received a message from my brother-in-law informing us that the photo was, in fact, live. Apparently, my sister had been the first to discover this horrifying feature. He followed up his message with a picture of her sitting there in absolute shock and bewilderment. And then there was my mother. She got the same live photo. At 61 years old, she received her very first unsolicited dick pic from her own son. Needless to say, this is now family lore. Despite my desperate protests, it will be brought up at holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, and probably my own funeral. It was definitely a decision to announce your engagement in that way. Like, even if that hadn't gone horribly wrong, I would still question, Why? Why would you do that? Anyway, speaking of people who accidentally find themselves front row to something that they did not ask to see, this next story from Captain Jaws reminds us that when that does happen, it is very important to bring a snack. So, I'm a bit of a soccer fan, and a few years ago, two of the big local teams had a match against each other. Naturally, I had parked myself in front of the TV in my living room, fully committed to the game. Little did I know there was another match happening at my neighbour's house. About 10 minutes into the first half, I started hearing screaming coming from the house across the street. At first, I didn't think much about it. Between the commentators on the TV, the crowd noise from the stadium, and the distance between our houses, I couldn't really make out any of the actual words. It was just yelling. So I did what any responsible soccer fan would do. I turned the volume up and kept watching. Eventually, halftime rolled around, and for anyone who doesn't watch sports, halftime tends to drag on forever. It's usually just a bunch of commercials, so I decided it was the perfect time to make myself some popcorn. I lowered the TV volume, wandered into the kitchen, and threw a bag in the microwave. By this point, my neighbours had been fighting for a solid 30 minutes, and just as the microwave beeped and I pulled the popcorn out, I heard doors slamming. Now, curiosity got the better of me. I figured I should at least assess the situation, just in case it had escalated into something serious enough to warrant calling the police. So I headed out to my balcony to investigate. I should also mention that I have 2 dogs, and if you've ever had dogs, you'll understand that leaving an unattended bag of freshly made popcorn is basically an invitation to chaos. So naturally, I took the popcorn with me. And that's how I found myself standing on my balcony with a giant bag of popcorn in hand, staring down at the 40-something married couple yelling at each other across the street. From what I could piece together, the wife had kicked the husband out of the house, and they were now continuing their argument in the front yard for the entire neighbourhood to enjoy. By this point, I could actually understand what they were yelling about, and it wasn't even anything dramatic. Or so I thought. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the wife slapped the husband across the face. Hard. I let out a dramatic gasp, and the husband immediately turned towards the sound, which meant both of them looked up, directly at me. Now, try to see this from their perspective. They'd spent over half an hour screaming at each other, slamming doors, and airing out their marital grievances in public. Then, the moment they took the fight outside, they looked up and found their gay, gossip-loving neighbour standing on his balcony with an enormous bag of popcorn. Their expressions changed instantly. As if defying the laws of physics, they somehow became even redder than they already were. And just like that, their anger shifted. Away from each other and directly on to me. "Enjoying the show, you fucker," one of them yelled. At that point, I made a decision. I was going to take one for the team. I slowly grabbed another handful of popcorn and casually shoved it into my mouth. Oddly enough, it worked. They stopped fighting with each other. Instead, they united as one twisted, dysfunctional force dedicated entirely to hating me. Both of them flipped me off, and then the wife turned to her husband and shouted, "Can you believe this fucking guy?" The husband patted her on the back in agreement as they marched back into the house together and slammed the door behind them. I went back inside too, but I was laughing far too hard to pay attention to the rest of the match. I couldn't even tell you what happened in the second half. But luckily, my team won 5-2. My neighbours apparently saved their marriage through mutual annoyance, and for one brief evening, all was right with the world. You know, I really respect the commitment to continuing to eat the popcorn. Like, if you accidentally find yourself being part of the entertainment, you may as well finish your snack. Now, we're going to take a very quick break, but coming up, we have a story about suspicion, assumptions, and one very misunderstood computer accessory. And welcome back. Let's jump straight into our next story from user Send Me Your Jokes, which proves that sometimes the least trustworthy person in the room is actually the one telling the truth. I work in IT and I've always been pretty handy with computers. Growing up, while I was still living at my parents' house, I did computer repairs on the side here and there. Because of that, I constantly had random computer parts, cables, accessories, half-finished projects just scattered around me. Eventually, I moved out, but I did leave a few things behind in my room. My brother was still living with my parents at the time, and he has been known to dabble in illegal activities, so my mom was already a little paranoid whenever something suspicious turned up around the house. Fast forward about 2 years, and I get a frantic phone call from my mom. And when I say frantic, I mean she was at about an 11 out of 10 before I even had a chance to say hello. She said, "I found a syringe in your room and I think it's for drugs, but your brother keeps lying to me and says it's yours. Do you know anything about it?" I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. So I started asking questions. "Okay," I said, "what exactly did my brother say it was?" "He's saying it's for a computer," she replied, "but I know better." At this point, I was already getting an idea of where this was going. "Does it have a needle?" I asked. "No." "Is there any writing on it?" "There's a company name on the side." "Okay. What company?" "It says Thermaltake." "And did you Google it?" "Yes," she said, sounding even more irritated. "And all that came up were computer parts. I know you don't use syringes for computers." I took a deep breath. "Okay, Mom. Let's walk through this together. You found this syringe in my old room. Your son, the one who works on computers, used to keep computer parts and accessories in that room. My brother told you it was for a computer. You Googled the company name and only found computer parts, and the syringe didn't have a needle." There was a long pause. "It's thermal paste, Mom." "What?" "It's thermal paste. It comes in a syringe because it's used to apply a very thin layer between a processor and its cooler, or on a graphics card. It helps transfer heat efficiently so the components don't overheat." Another pause. And then I added, "You're screaming at him over thermal paste." Silence. "If it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, and swims like a duck, did you ever stop to think that maybe, just maybe, he was actually telling the truth?" Oh. Click. She hung up on me. Naturally, I immediately called my brother to tell him exactly what had happened, and more importantly, to make sure he never let her live it down. To this day, I don't know what makes me laugh more. The fact that my mom was convinced she'd uncovered a secret drug operation, or the fact that my brother, of all people, happened to be innocent and nobody believed him. It's painful, so painful. But if you thought that level of secondhand embarrassment was bad, just wait until you hear what happens in our next story from user Little Redbird 1991. Because there are awkward introductions, and then there are those introductions that are so disastrous that your only option afterwards is to fake a medical emergency and disappear. Let's get into it. So I, 34 female, have been best friends with Ali, 30 female, for about 5 years now. For most of the time I've known her, she was in a long-term relationship with a guy called Rick, but that went south around Christmas. She recently met a new guy and they've been going out for about a month. Now, for context, I am someone who has a tendency to put my foot in my mouth when meeting new people, especially if there's pressure. So when Ali decided it was time for the extended friend group to meet the new boyfriend, she gave us all a briefing. She told us that he was really shy and kind of reserved, so not to take it personally if he seemed a little standoffish. She also mentioned that he was rich, like rolling in old family money rich, but she quickly followed that up by saying he doesn't like talking about it and that she didn't want him to think she was only interested in his money. Fair enough. Then she looked directly at me and told me, very explicitly, not to call him by her ex's name. Which, admittedly, I have done before, so this warning was justified. She also told us that his name was Wallace, but he goes by Wally. Got it. Don't mention money, don't be offended if he's quiet, and under absolutely no circumstances call him Rick. Easy. So me, my husband, our friends, and all their partners met Ali and Wally at a bar downtown. I noticed Wally isn't really socializing with anyone, but Ali had warned us that he was shy. So I go to introduce myself and my husband. I walked over, I smiled, I looked directly at Ali and her boyfriend, and I said, "Hi Ali, and you must be rich." Ali stared at me like I'd suddenly grown 3 heads. And then it hit me. I realized what I'd done. I had just called her current boyfriend the wrong version of her ex-boyfriend's name. Rich. Close enough to ruin my entire evening. But I thought, no problem. I can recover from this. People misspeak all the time. So I laughed awkwardly and said, ha, oops, I meant to say you're Ali's wallet. Silence. Actual silence. Suddenly, everyone nearby seemed to be looking at me, and all I could think was that I wanted to throw myself off the nearest balcony. Unfortunately for me, we were on the ground floor. Before I could make things worse, my husband swooped in to save the day. He stuck out his hand and said, very clearly with perfect emphasis, "Nice to meet you, Wally." Every syllable was crisp. Wally shook his hand, and the two of them immediately started chatting like normal human beings. Meanwhile, I quietly excused myself and ran to the bathroom. Now I'm in the bathroom of this bar, staring at my reflection and wondering if I could somehow convince everyone that my IBS has finally won and my intestines were staging a dramatic escape, just so I could go home, crawl into bed, and cry. That is rough. I mean, we have all been there. I myself am pretty bad with names, but still, rough. Now, we are not finished with the secondhand embarrassment for today. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I have one more frustratingly painful story for you. Okay, welcome back. Our last story today is from user bebop_, and it's proof that sometimes the call really is coming from inside the house. A few months ago, I was lying in bed just about to fall asleep when I started hearing a noise that seemed to be coming from upstairs. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like a bouncing ball. Not just a ball hitting the floor once. It sounded like someone had dropped a rubber ball from very high up. It started softly, then the bouncing would speed up and intensify as it was approaching the ground. Boing, 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 boing. Then silence. A few minutes later, it would happen again. The sound itself wasn't loud, it was soft, but it sounded very close. Now, I'm the kind of person who can sleep absolutely anywhere. I can sleep on planes, trains, couches. If Chuck Norris had a sleep-related superpower, I have it. But this noise was psychological warfare. The first night, it continued for another 30 minutes before stopping. Some nights, it would go on for over an hour. Other days, nothing happened at all. Occasionally, I would hear it in the middle of the day, which was almost worse because I couldn't concentrate on anything. I'd be trying to read a book or watch a movie, and there it was again. Boing, 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 boing. But it mostly appeared at bedtime, like some sort of sleep deprivation demon with a very specific schedule. This went on for over a month. One night, after an especially exhausting day, I decided to go to bed early, 9 o'clock. I was excited. I was going to be responsible. I was going to get a full night's sleep. I climbed into bed, and of course, there was that motherfucker again. I snapped. I didn't even think. I got out of bed, marched to my apartment door, and stormed upstairs to confront my neighbours. Now, I need you to understand what I looked like. I wasn't wearing a bra. I had an oversized t-shirt covered in prehistoric-looking spots. My sweatpants were at least 3 sizes too big, and I took the bottoms into my socks, because apparently I had reached the stage of adulthood where warmth outranks dignity. The socks themselves didn't even match. Different colours, different lengths. My hair looked less like a hairstyle and more like a premium nesting material. I hadn't even bothered to put shoes on. So there I was, climbing the stairs looking like a cryptid, and I hadn't even planned what I was going to say. As I got closer to the apartment, I could hear a lot of noise coming from inside. I rang the bell and a young woman opened the door. Then, one by one, everyone else in the apartment appeared behind her to see what was happening. There must have been 8 of them. and they were all incredibly well dressed, like they'd just come from a wedding reception or some fancy event, and they were visibly, delightfully drunk. So there I stood in the hallway, explaining to a small audience of elegant, tipsy strangers that there was a mysterious noise coming from their apartment. It sounds like... I paused. Like a bouncing ball. They stared at me. The woman explained that she had several housemates, but the room directly above mine was actually empty. I insisted that that could not be right. No, I said. This happens almost every day. It's been over a month. I'm starting to lose my mind. She said she had no idea what could be causing it. There wasn't anything in the apartment that made the sound I was describing. At which point, naturally, I decided the best course of action was to imitate the noise. Yes, I stood there making bouncing ball noises with my own mouth for a group of fancy drunk people. Boing, 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 boing. At some point during this surreal interaction, I realized none of this was getting resolved. I was probably going to have to move house. Then, without thinking, I heard myself say, "Do you want to come hear it?" And somehow, they agreed. So there we were, me and 8 very fashionable drunk strangers, standing silently in my tiny bedroom, waiting, listening, expecting the mysterious bouncing ball ghost to reveal itself. And of course, nothing happened. Not a single sound. I apologized profusely, escorted the fancy drunk people back to the door, and went to bed to spoon my shame and stupidity. That was last week. Today, a friend came over for the afternoon. We were chatting when suddenly, boing, 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 boing. I practically leapt out of my chair. "Are you hearing this?" I shouted. "Yeah," my friend said. "I can't do this anymore. I swear, I think I'm going to have to move." There was a pause. Then my friend looked over at the wall. "It sounds like it's coming from your heater." Turns out, my heater has 2 switches. One turns it on. The other changes the temperature setting. And if the heater is switched off, while the heater dial is set to heat mode, it makes an incredibly weird noise. A noise that sounds exactly like a bouncing ball. And thanks to the acoustics and echoes of the building, it somehow sounded like it was coming from the apartment upstairs. So after a month of sleep deprivation, questioning my sanity, accusing innocent neighbours, performing sound effects for a group of fancy drunk people, and briefly considering moving house, I discovered I'd been haunted by my own heater the entire time. That is all we have for you today, folks. I'm your host, jrice, and this has been The RR Show, a production of Evergreen Podcasts. Our producer is Declan Roars, and our sound engineer is Gray Sienna Longfellow. If you enjoyed the show, we would absolutely love it if you subscribed and maybe left us a review on whatever platform you get your podcasts, wherever you are listening right now. And if you have a story that you think would be good on the show, you can send it to us at jrice@evergreenpodcast.com. That's JRICE@evergreenpodcast.com. If you would like to give us any feedback on the show, you can take the brief survey linked in our show notes and be entered to win a $50 gift card. See you next week.